Do you have a specific way things need to be done? Not a preference, a way. The coffee has to be made in a particular sequence. The route to work is non-negotiable unless there is a concrete reason to change it. The shelf is organized by a logic that exists entirely in your head and would take 20 minutes to explain, and you already know nobody wants the explanation. You don't announce these things. You learn not to. But when someone disrupts them, something tightens in your chest before you even consciously register what happened. That tightening is not anxiety. It's not a control problem. It's not a personality flaw dressed up in adult clothes. But you've been told, directly and indirectly, across years and relationships, that it is. You've been called rigid, difficult, high maintenance. Someone in your life, probably more than one someone, has looked at you with a particular exhaustion that means they've stopped trying to understand and started managing. And the worst part isn't the label. The worst part is how often you have believed it. You've spent a significant portion of your mental energy either defending these preferences, apologizing for them, or quietly dismantling them piece by piece so other people are more comfortable. And still, when the coffee is made wrong, something in you registers it the same way a surgeon registers a misplaced instrument during a procedure. Not dramatically, precisely. Here's what this video is going to argue. The label you've been given is the wrong diagnosis. What you're actually dealing with is not a social defect. It is a cognitive architecture, and there is a difference, not a small one, between a mind that is broken and a mind that is operating at a resolution most people never reach. We're not going to get there yet. First, you need to understand what this trait has actually cost you, because the reframe doesn't land until you've sat with the full weight of what you've been carrying. It started early. Maybe it was a parent who called you stubborn for wanting your sandwich cut a specific way. Maybe it was a teacher who read your need for a particular kind of order as defiance. Maybe it was a sibling who mocked the ritual you'd built around something private, the way you arranged your desk, the exact sequence of your morning. And suddenly something you'd never had to explain or defend was exposed as strange, as too much. The early wound isn't just the mockery, it's the confusion. Because before someone named it as a problem, it wasn't a problem. It was just how you thought. You weren't aware you were doing anything unusual. You were simply operating at the level of detail that felt accurate to you. And then the world reflected back that accurate felt excessive. That precision felt like a burden other people had to carry on your behalf. So you learned to hide it. Not all at once. Incrementally. You stopped explaining the route logic out loud. You let people make your coffee wrong rather than specify. You reorganized your system after company left so no one had to witness it. You built an elaborate invisible architecture around this part of yourself, not to protect it, but to protect other people from having to encounter it. And you called that growth. You called that being easy to be around. Here is the internal monologue. You know this one. It goes, just let it go. It doesn't matter. You're making this into a thing. Other people don't care about this, and that means you shouldn't either. You're being difficult. You're being inflexible. You're making everything harder than it needs to be. What is wrong with you that you cannot simply not care about the order of the items in the bag? And so you suppress it. You override it. You perform flexibility so convincingly that sometimes you fool yourself. And then something small happens. The wrong mug, the altered plan, the item placed back in the wrong position, and the discomfort is immediate and disproportionate, and you hate yourself a little for it because you thought you'd gotten better. You thought you'd learned to care less, but you haven't cared less. You've just gotten better at appearing to. The suppression costs you more than the preference does. When you override this trait, you don't relax. You redirect. You spend cognitive energy managing the dissonance between what you perceive and what you've told yourself you're not allowed to feel about it. You function, but at a lower resolution. You're a camera with the lens partially obscured, still taking pictures, but not at the quality you're capable of. Across relationships, this trait has become a kind of inheritance. You carry the accumulated judgments. The ex who called you exhausting. The friend who said you needed to relax. The colleague who rolled their eyes at your process. And because these came from multiple directions across multiple years, you began to treat the consensus as evidence, as if the sheer number of people who found you too much was proof that you were in fact too much. But consensus is not diagnosis. Majority opinion is not accuracy. And the real question underneath all of this, the one you've never quite let yourself ask directly, is not, am I normal? The real question is the way my mind processes the world a defect, or is it a feature I've been taught to be ashamed of? That distinction matters more than anything else in this video. Hold it. Pi 1. Dismantle the label. Rigid means resistant to change without reason. That is not what you are. You change constantly. You adapt routes when there's a genuine obstacle. You modify systems when they stop working. You update your preferences when better information arrives. What you don't do is change for the sake of other people's comfort with your consistency. That is not rigidity. That is integrity of process. The label rigid was applied not because your behavior was irrational, but because it was inconvenient, because it made someone else feel like they had failed to meet your standard, or like your standard was an implicit criticism of their lack of one. Rigidity implies malfunction. What you have is not malfunction. What you have is consistency at a granular level that most people cannot sustain. The word rigid is not a description of you. It is a description of how you make other people feel. Those are not the same thing. Point 2. The real psychological origin. Strong micro-preferences are not born from fear or trauma, though they can interact with both. Their origin is perceptual. Some minds process the environment at higher resolution than others. Where most people register coffee as coffee, you register temperature, ratio, sequence, vessel. This is not compulsion. It is granularity. Your nervous system is picking up more data, and your preferences are the organized response to that data. Research on high perceptual sensitivity consistently shows that individuals who process environmental detail at greater depth are not responding to an excess of anxiety. They are responding to an excess of information. The preference is the mind's attempt to create signal clarity from a high data input stream. Your coffee order is not a ritual of control. It is a calibration. The function of this trait is precision. And precision is not a personality quirk. Precision is a cognitive tool. One that, when applied deliberately, produces results at a quality that others cannot reliably replicate. You are not controlling your environment because you are afraid of it. You are optimizing it because you can perceive the difference between optimized and unoptimized, and you cannot unfeel that difference once you felt it. Point 3. What their judgment reveals. When someone mocks your micro-preferences, they are making a claim that the level of detail you operate at is unnecessary, that the standard you apply is excessive, and that claim requires them to also believe that their own level of detail is the correct one, which is a belief they've never had to examine, because no one has ever called them out for not having preferences. People who lack strong preferences often read the presence of them as a judgment of their own flexibility, as if your specificity implies their vagueness is wrong. It does not. But the fact that they interpret it that way tells you something about the insecurity underneath the judgment. They are not evaluating you objectively. They are defending their own standard, or their lack of one. There's a deeper pattern here too. People who find your preferences exhausting are almost always people who do not have to maintain precision in their own lives, either because their work does not require it, their relationships do not demand it, or they have simply never been held accountable to the gap between good enough and correct. They mistake the absence of standards for easygoing. They have confused low standards with low maintenance. The judgment of someone who has never had to care about precision is not evidence, it is noise. Point 4. The concrete advantage. When this trait is not suppressed, it produces a specific and measurable advantage: consistency of quality across domains. The same mind that cannot tolerate the coffee made wrong cannot tolerate the report written slopped illy. The same architecture that insists on the correct route insists on the correct argument. This is not compartmentalized. It is structural. The standard you apply to your coffee is the same standard you apply to everything. This matters enormously in any domain that requires sustained quality. Any field where the difference between good and excellent is the product of accumulated micro-decisions. Architecture, surgery, software engineering, writing, design, legal work, financial analysis. These are domains where the person who cannot tell the difference between close enough and correct is the person who eventually causes the failure that everyone else has to clean up. Your trait is also an advantage in relationships with the right people. People who interpret your specificity not as demand but as signal. 'Tis a person who knows what they want, communicates it clearly, and does not gaslight you into uncertainty about your own perception. These are not the people who have judged you. These are the people who are still in your life, who have learned your coffee order and don't find it remarkable. The advantage is not just output quality. The advantage is that you live in a world where things are actually as good as they can be, which is a form of satisfaction most people never access because they never knew precisely what they wanted. Point 5. The trait used versus the trait suppressed. When this trait is suppressed, it doesn't disappear. It misfires. The precision that should be directed outward, toward work, toward environment, toward creation, turns inward. It becomes self-criticism. It becomes hypervigilance about whether you are too much, not enough, acceptable or not. The same cognitive tool that could build something with extraordinary accuracy begins auditing you instead. Suppressed precision also becomes resentment. When you override your preference to make someone else comfortable, you do not feel generous. You feel erased, and you carry that quietly, sometimes for years, in small tallies that accumulate into a distance between you and the people who kept asking you to be less particular. When the trait is acknowledged and applied, when you stop apologizing for the standard and start directing it, the precision stops misfiring. It lands. The person who insisted on the correct cup makes the correct call in the meeting. The person who mapped the route to the minute finishes the project before the deadline. The trait is not the problem. What you've been doing with it is. The suppressed version of this trait is a liability. The applied version is the thing people will eventually be grateful for, even if they never fully understand it. Stop using the word picky. Stop using high maintenance. Stop using rigid, fussy, difficult, or particular in ways that carry shame. These words were handed to you by people who wanted you to take up less space, and you've been using them on yourself ever since, which is a much more effective form of suppression than anything they could have done from the outside. Replace them with specific language, not vague positive rebranding, specific words that accurately describe the cognitive function taking place. When you notice a strong preference, say internally, I have a clear standard here, not I'm being difficult. When you articulate a preference to someone else, say, I know exactly what I want, not I'm sorry, I know I'm picky. When you catch the old language starting, I know this is stupid, I'm aware this doesn't matter, interrupt it. Replace it with, I operate at a high level of specificity, and that is not a character flaw. Language shapes cognition. The words you use to describe yourself internally are not neutral. Every time you use the old language, you are confirming the original judgment. Every time you use the new language, you are beginning to undo it. This is not affirmation. This is accuracy. The new words are more true than the old ones. Not all environments are compatible with this trait. Some are actively hostile to it. You already know this. You've experienced both kinds. The question is whether you've made the distinction consciously or whether you've been adapting yourself to environments that will never accommodate what you're capable of. Environments that allow this trait to function well share specific characteristics. They value quality over speed. They define success by output accuracy rather than social ease. The people in them are themselves precise, or they at least respect precision in others, even if they don't share it. In these environments, your trait is not managed. It is useful. You are not tolerated. You are appropriate. Environments that suppress this trait are characterized by comfort with approximation. Good enough is a terminal destination rather than a waypoint. Specificity is read as elitism or complaint. The social cost of holding a standard is considered higher than the benefit of the standard itself. In these environments, you are not too much. You are misplaced. The audit question is not, how do I make myself work in every environment? The question is, which environments am I in because I chose them, and which am I in because I believed I had to tolerate them? Where you spend your time and energy is a decision. Start making it like one. The next time someone mocks or minimizes your micro-preferences, you have a choice. Not about whether to defend yourself. That's optional and often not worth it. The choice is about what you say to yourself in the moment after. The two internal sentences are these. They are reading my standard as a problem. That tells me something about what they are comfortable with, not something definitive about me. Those two sentences do specific work. The first removes the sting of the judgment by naming it accurately as a reading, not a verdict. The second prevents you from converting their discomfort into evidence about your worth. You are not arguing with them. You are not dismissing them. You are simply refusing to let their reaction become your self-assessment. You can also, and this is optional, not prescribed, choose to say something externally. Not to defend, not to explain. Simply, yes, I know what I want, said flatly, without apology. It is an unremarkable statement about an unremarkable fact, and delivering it that way is the most efficient possible signal that you have stopped treating this as something to be ashamed of. Ownership is not pride. Pride is performed for an audience. Ownership is a private relationship with a fact. The mental posture of someone who has stopped treating this trait as a liability is not someone who announces their preferences loudly or celebrates their specificity. It is someone who has simply stopped carrying the weight of other people's discomfort with it. The person who owns this trait does not over-explain their coffee order. They give it. They do not preface their root preference with, I know this sounds crazy, but they state it. They do not apologize for the way their system is organized. They maintain it. There is no performance in either direction. No defensiveness. No performance of casualness. There is just the unambiguous fact of knowing what they want and being willing to let that be what it is. This posture does not develop instantly. It develops through repetition of a simple practice, noticing when you would have apologized and choosing not to. Not because you've decided your preferences are everyone else's problem, but because you've decided they are not problems at all. They are data, and you are someone who operates on accurate data. That's not a flaw. That is a qualification. Here is the larger pattern. You have spent years, possibly most of your adult life, measuring yourself against a standard built for a different cognitive style. The standard that says caring deeply about small things is disproportionate. The standard that says flexibility is always a virtue and specificity is always a burden. The standard that says the person who doesn't mind either way is easier to be around, and that being easy is the same as being good. That standard was never designed for the way your mind works. It was designed for the mean, the center of the distribution, the person who processes the world at normal resolution, and for whom most environments are close enough. You are not that person. You have never been that person. And every time you tried to be, you got quieter, smaller, and more estranged from the part of yourself that knows the difference between right and almost right. Here is what is actually true about you right now. You have a mind that notices things other people miss. You have built a lifetime of standards, that when applied, produce quality that others cannot replicate without knowing why. You have been carrying a trait that makes you distinctively useful in every domain, that requires sustained precision, and you have been doing it while simultaneously carrying the shame of people who couldn't see past the inconvenience it caused them. That is not weakness. That is an enormous amount of cognitive labor spent in the wrong direction. The final reframe is this: what you've been calling your problem is the same thing as your precision. They are not separate. You cannot have the quality of mind that produces your best work without having the quality of mind that registers the wrong cup. You cannot have the navigation skill without the insistence on the correct route. You cannot have the eye for what's wrong with a design without the eye that caught everything wrong in every room you've ever walked into. It is one thing. It has always been one thing. Stop trying to separate the parts you were told to be ashamed of from the parts you were told to be proud of. They are the same architecture. They come from the same place, and the only version of you that fully works is the one that stops treating half of your mind as a liability to be managed and starts treating all of it as the instrument it actually is. Your standards are not your problem. They are your answer.